CTV's W5.
The Canadian heavyweight champion, George Chuvalo.
A life of triumph, tragedy, and pain.
He survived in the super exploitive, cruel world of boxing.
He wasn't just a one-dimensional brawler kind of guy. He could box.
I saw my father as fearless.
Chuvalo has never been knocked off his feet.
My father was larger than life.
And
you learn how to make the most out of tough situations.
Locked down in a deadly prison far from home.
Everything happened extremely quickly.
There was very, very little hope.
I was scared, confused, desperately trying to understand what was going on.
This is going to take a miracle.
Here is Avery Haynes.
Welcome to W5. His name is synonymous with boxing in this country. Heavyweight champion George Chuvalo, the man who took on Muhammad Ali. W5 has interviewed him 4 times over the years. Sandie Rinaldo last spoke to him in 1996. She returns tonight with a poignant update on George and his resilience living with dementia.
White corner from Toronto, the Canadian heavyweight champion, George Chuvalo.
George Chuvalo, a Canadian legend, one of the toughest fighters in boxing history. In a 21-year career in nearly 100 fights, he was never knocked down, not once. Celebrated for enduring 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali. And for taking on the biggest names in the ring. But when the spotlight dimmed, Chuvalo was brought to his knees by financial ruin and personal tragedy. His family of 7, 4 sons and a daughter, shattered by drugs, overdoses, and suicides.
The situation we were in, you have to develop coping skills, right? So I developed coping skills.
You have 3 drug addicts in a house with a father who's struggling financially. His wife's not there. I'm not there. It was a hard time. It was hard.
He lost 3 sons, Jesse, George Jr., and Stephen, and his wife Lynn in just 11 years. His only daughter Vanessa and eldest son Mitch also left to make sense of immense tragedy.
How do you deal with that grief? I felt like my heart was beneath my feet. I didn't know what to do. But my dad was feeling so much grief. I couldn't save him, and he couldn't really save us. We had to find our own way.
That was the start of the roller coaster ride.
I interviewed George in 1996, his losses still raw.
I don't know how you cope with one after another. Where do you find the strength?
I think outwardly I appear strong, and I guess I am to some degree. But I know how I hurt privately. I don't think I'm so strong privately.
And this summer reconnected with him in a much different place.
Sometimes as journalists, we do stories and we don't revisit them. So for me, it was important to revisit this story and find out how he's doing all these years later. He can't move anymore. He is in the throes of dementia. This was not the force of nature I interviewed 27 years ago. This was a man nearing the end of his life.
George was born in 1937 in Toronto to Croatian parents who immigrated to Canada. His father worked at a meatpacking plant where George would also get a job at the age of 15. He started boxing, and at just 18 years old, he was the amateur heavyweight champion of Canada.
To understand my dad, you really have to understand my grandparents. And he is 50% his father, a violent, stern, disciplined person with a huge pain threshold, and my grandmother, who was warm, loving, emotional, caring, cry in an instant. There's nothing inauthentic about my father.
In 1956, at 19, George turned pro and started earning money to fight matches in some of the biggest venues in the world.
For the heavyweight championship of the world.
In the blue corner, George Chuvalo!
He trained at the Lansdowne Boxing Gym in West Toronto.
Nice to be back in the West End, Bloor and Lansdowne.
Oh, wow. This brings back a lot of memories. And there's what used to be the Lansdowne Boxing Gym with the wrought iron rickety stairway.
Fire escape, yeah. I used to think it was so high, you know, up there, like
it was.
Panorama of the West End from up there.
You could smell this old sweat.
Like it was embedded into the wall.
It was embedded in the walls. And then you walk in and it's like the scenery
Dusty.
But it was like exciting because you have this ring and all men, mostly men. There were some women there, you know,
but women weren't boxing back
No,
then.
they were just like watching.
Hang around.
Like girlfriends and whatnot. And I seemed to be the only female child.
Stephen Brunt is a Canadian sports writer and boxing historian. Brunt has known George Chuvalo for 4 decades and remembers the legendary gym.
It's sort of like what you would imagine a boxing gym would be like in the movies. Like it was almost a cliche. And there was kind of a card game going on all the time. There were these characters there who looked like they were out of central casting. There was a lot of stuff going on there. There were a lot of illegal activities going on there.
Not only fighters and bookies, but musicians visited the gym. Legends like Miles Davis and Ronnie Hawkins.
Inside it was like machine gun-like. People yelling and screaming, skipping rope on a wood floor. The rat-a-tat-tat of it all. Yeah, the noise was very distinctive.
When you were growing up, can you imagine yourself a little girl again and thinking about your dad? How did you view your dad when you were a kid? How did you see him?
I saw my father as fearless, as a great protector and a loving dad. To me, he was bigger than life, and I felt privileged to have that. But also, I was the only girl. I was the youngest, with 4 older brothers.
Daddy's little girl?
In a sense, my dad really didn't know how to deal with me. But I always felt special. I did. I felt like I was on a bit of a pedestal. He took me everywhere.
When he came home, when he was at home with all of you kids, what kind of a dad was he?
My dad was wonderful. He was always trying to expand our horizons. My father was authentically alive. There's so much out there about him. There are great stories written about him. There are great interviews like he's had with you before. I think he was such an authentic character.
No matter where you're watching, greetings from Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Tonight, in a 15-round international contest, world heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali defends his title against George Chuvalo of Toronto, the Canadian heavyweight champion.
By the time he fights Ali in '66,
A bell for round 1.
he's 10 years into his professional career already. Like, he's not some up-and-coming kid. You know, you think of why do people know about George Chuvalo? It's especially because of the Ali fight, of course.
Stephen Brunt chronicled the Chuvalo-Ali fight in his book, Facing Ali.
He was not an obvious guy to fight Muhammad Ali in March of 1966, but they needed somebody fast. And so they went to George and said, will you take the fight on 17 days' notice? And he said yes. So the most important moment in his professional life, in his boxing life, the reason people remember him was in a lot of ways a complete fluke. Muhammad Ali in 1966 is at the height of his powers. He's lightning fast. He's the fastest heavyweight in history.
I think that's the big question tonight. Can he actually knock this man out?
Chuvalo has never been knocked off his feet. Never been knocked out.
I went to the Ali fight in '66. I was in the 4th row. So,
wow.
Yeah, I remember my mother telling me about what was going to transpire, that people were going to be hitting each other and I should be preparing myself.
How old were you at the time?
6.
6, okay. That was quite the match. He took one hit after another, and at the end, Ali's hands were bloodied from going after your father.
Yeah.
Did that make you uncomfortable? Did you squirm? Were you worried for your dad?
I can't remember if I was worried for my dad. I do, however, remember standing up on the seat and yelling at the referee, Jackie Silvers, to get the heck out of the way so my dad could hit him. So yeah, I was engaged with it. Of course, I wasn't aware of all the damaging things that can happen to a fighter.
5 seconds.
I always looked at my father with a sense of his being a bit of a Superman.
It's all over.
Your winner, Muhammad Ali.
In hindsight, I think we kind of look back on that and view it as a triumph. And George put on a brave and honorable performance. Ali that night would have beaten Joe Louis, I think. I think he would have beaten just about anybody you can name. And George hung in with him and never took a backward step. So, George's reputation was, in that moment, was for bravery, his willingness to endure.
Chuvalo would continue to fight the best in the world: Joe Frazier, Ernie Terrell, George Foreman.
Here's round 1 of this 10-round heavyweight bout. George Chuvalo in the blue trunks with the red border. Chuvalo's best is his left hook, and he got that in twice to the body. And McCarty is telling the boys not to get too rough. It isn't often you see Chuvalo using a left jab. Maybe they taught him something.
His skills, I think, were always a little bit underrated. He wasn't just a one-dimensional brawler kind of guy. He could box. George always kind of resented this idea that all he was a guy who took punches and kept coming, that he was a punching bag. He wasn't. He was way, way better than that.
It's all over.
Still, the constant blows to the body, to his head, a concern. Even back in 1969, when he spoke to W5's Ken LaFoley.
You do catch a lot of punches in a fight, and you do swell up.
Right.
Have you ever had a medical examination that wasn't that pre-fight routine examination, but that where some serious professional medical man had a look at you to find out what, if anything, all of these years of taking this kind of punishment have done to you?
Well, we must have, I believe it's called EGG test or EEG, head test.
Electroencephalogram,
right.
Yeah.
And of course they give you the electrocardiograph test for your heart, and they give you all types, especially in New York State, they give you a complete, thorough, 100% examination, and there's nothing been found wrong with me, even though we have these tests every 6 months when we go to New York. So, if there's any damage, it's certainly well hidden, and I don't think it shows. So.
How do you feel? How do you feel? Do you feel, not when you're going into the ring, but just when you're getting up in the morning to spend an ordinary day at home with the kids? How do you feel? Do you feel as sharp as you used to?
In fact, I feel sharper now than I ever felt. Certainly. Yeah.
After that 1969 interview, Chuvalo would continue to fight for nearly a decade.
Was that my best? Well, I was punching pretty well. I was satisfied with myself. I mean, I wouldn't say I was perfect or anything like that, but I was pretty happy the way it turned out.
And while he was stoic in the ring and quick thinking with reporters, the cost of pro boxing would catch up with George Chuvalo.
Next on W5.
It's an awesome battering that Chuvalo is taking.
The battles outside the ring.
I couldn't comfort her. She couldn't comfort me.
When W5 continues.
George Boom Boom Chuvalo, a Canadian heavyweight boxing champion. He turned pro at 19 after knocking out 4 opponents in one night in 1956.
I put a lot of years into building a strong foundation.
W5 has interviewed George 4 times, and in 1971, Norm Perry asked him why he stays in the ring.
The constant hope of fame, fortune, and prestige makes it difficult for many men to give up boxing. George Chuvalo keeps on fighting because of what he calls a respect for power.
I think all kids, especially if you come from kind of a rough neighborhood, and I think you can recognize respect for power because other kids bully you around. All of a sudden, you know that power means something.
Driven to take the punches.
It's an awesome battering that Chuvalo is taking. He is now spitting blood.
George was a tough fighter. This took a toll on his body and his mind. And now, at the age of 85, he has dementia and is living out his life at a nursing home just blocks from where he once trained. I went to see him there, but we didn't take cameras in.
We will not show him in his bed. His children who are with me, Mitch and Vanessa, both want him to be remembered as a gentle giant, a man who loved his family, who, yes, experienced enormous tragedy, but provided strength.
He survived in the super exploitive, cruel world of boxing for 21 years.
Mitch Chuvalo is George's oldest son. He visits him at the care home every single day.
I mean, think about the metric in my brain. I'm going, okay, 1 concussion or 2 concussions, how does that stack up against 1,000 sub-concussive blows to the head?
Blow after blow after blow to the head.
Yeah, death by 1,000 blows.
The years after boxing have hurt George Chuvalo and his surviving children the most.
He endured so much tragedy in your family, right? The loss of 3 sons to heroin, to drug use, the loss of his wife, his high school sweetheart. How did you come through this unscathed? Or maybe you didn't.
Well, no,
maybe you didn't.
No, I think about my psychological landscape. I've had challenges, as anybody who was in my situation or anybody in my family. I developed coping skills.
Jesse, the youngest, took his life in 1985 at the age of 20, after years of surgeries and painkillers tied to a childhood injury.
My brother Jesse it's still, his death still haunts me more than any of the others, because he opened a Pandora's box once he took his own life. And that escape route was opened up for other people in my family.
George Lee and Stephen also became addicts. In 1993, just 8 years later, George Lee was the next to die. He had been in and out of prison, and at the age of 30, overdosed on heroin. And just 4 days after, their mother, Lynn, took her life. In 1996, I talked to George about the grief.
It's unbearable to look at your wife when you lost her son. And I know she felt the same when she looked at me. I couldn't comfort her. She couldn't comfort me. She wasn't a heroin addict, but she took drugs to take her life.
Did you have any suspicion whatsoever that it was that bad for her?
I felt she was going to take her life. I didn't know it would be that quick.
That's my mother and I. I was a mama's girl.
Vanessa is George's only daughter. She wasn't even born until after her father's famous Muhammad Ali fight.
I love looking through old photos. Tell me who everybody is here.
So this is Mitchell. That's Stephen. That's Georgie. That's Jesse. That's myself. And that's my mother and father. So this is Jesse. He loved nature, and my mother always made sure we went camping every year. This is on an island called Beckwith Island in Georgian Bay, and this is Jesse at our house at Gulfwood. Jesse died when he was 20, and after he died, it kind of set a downward spiral. This is myself and my father, one of my father's proudest moments. I graduated from University of Guelph in 1993.
He does look very proud in this shot.
Very proud. Sadly, that was shortly after that. That's the year that my brother died and my mother died.
And 3 years later, Vanessa found a third brother, Stephen, had overdosed at her apartment.
He had a hard time dealing with his 2 younger brothers dying. So when you're an addict, what do you do to kind of not feel that pain? You're going to continue, right? And he had a very hard time.
So you found your brother?
Yes.
You found Stephen?
Yes. It was horrible.
Excitement of viewing the smack or the heroin in the dealer's hands.
After the tragedies, George Chuvalo toured high schools talking about the dangers of drugs. He married again soon after. He tried to find new ways of making money, which didn't always work. Author and journalist Stephen Brunt has followed his life and career.
He never could settle into anything after boxing. Boxing provided him with a level of discipline because of the training, and it provided him with a payoff, setting a goal, getting to that moment, having the fight, getting paid. There's a real rhythm to the life of a boxer. But outside of boxing, he never found anything that gave him that kind of rhythm, and he was still always looking for the big score. You know, the get-rich-quick scheme. But he could never settle into anything. And he had this kind of manic energy. So, you know, he was never in one place for very long. He was buzzing here and buzzing there and had a million things on the go.
There were always undesirables hanging around the gym, always coming to our house. Not the greatest judge of character, my father.
As a writer, he was a great subject. I learned something about the complexity of us as human beings, especially when you're writing about sports figures, that you can be many different things. You can be who you are in the arena or in the ring, and then you are who you are outside the arena and outside the ring. Those things can be contradictory sometimes.
I'm so lucky. I have YouTube footage. I've got magazine articles. I've got newspaper write-ups that will entertain me the rest of my life.
He'll never be lost to you.
Never be lost to me.
It was difficult, though, I have to say. It was difficult to watch him immobile, lying in that bed and staring off into the distance. Are you prepared to lose him?
Yes. Yeah. Once the dementia was diagnosed, I prepared myself for that. I've been around boxing all my life. Neurocognitively, so it never ends well. It never ends well. So I steeled myself for that long ago.
How do you think your dad wants to be remembered?
I think my father wants to be remembered as a very tough, diligent, hardworking son of working class people.
My father was larger than life. He was my protector, but when I go see him and I look at him, I'm still awed by how handsome he still is and how strong he still looks. That it is very sad. It's sad because he's helpless. But in a sense, he's still kind of fearless. You know, he's not afraid.
George recently turned 86 years old, and Mitch says he plans to take his dad out to visit the places in Toronto he once called home.